So recently I was able to get my hands on the modernisation mod for tabs, and the first thing I did was check if there are any tank units, and there were. One unit. The unit was literally called Tank, however it was easy for me to identify the fact that it was a T-90 main battle tank. So instead of only letting this opportunity to talk about tanks serve as a flashy thumbnail and title, I'm going to review and compare the in-game T-90 with the real world one. At the start of their tank designing journey, the Soviet Union imported successful foreign tank designs to form the basis for their own tanks such as the French Renault FT. The Soviets started working on their own tanks based off these foreign designs. One such tank was the T-18, which had too much in common with the French FT for it to be a coincidence. Skipping over some more events, we reached 1928, where the Soviets and Germans were working in secret on new tank designs and tactics, with the Soviets learning some things from the Germans during this time. Following this, the Red Army came out with a few more tank designs, still inspired by foreign tanks, such as more based on the Renault FT and a few being modified English Vickers 6 tons, which became the BT series. The foreign copies were continually refined and added to, with the Soviets releasing some very strange looking tanks during their tank designing journey. The multi-turreted T-38 and BT stand out to me the most for being so unique. 1941 rolls around and the Germans begin Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. As the Germans advanced, they came across the Soviet T-34. This tank had decent armour and a decent gun, the 76mm, and the Germans had a tough time taking those things out. The Panzer III and IV had a hard time punching through its armour. However, tank factories had to be moved east after the Germans started invading. This limited the amount of tanks the Soviets could produce, which limited the T-34's impact on the Germans' advance. By October 1941, the Germans were dangerously close to Moscow, with some divisions being only 20 miles from Red Square. However, tank production soon reached 100%, with the Soviets producing the T-34 in ridiculous numbers, with an insane 35,000 of these being made between 1941 and 45. The T-34 was a landmark in Soviet tank design, being cheap and easy to produce and often crudely put together to further reduce costs, making it the perfect tank for an attritional war. The T-34 became one of the Soviets' main tanks of choice during the Second World War. Although spec-wise the German heavy tanks greatly outmatched the T-34, German tanks were outnumbered and weren't being replaced as quickly as the Soviets were replacing their tanks, and the Germans were eventually overwhelmed. The T-34's success mostly lies with the fact the Soviets were at it like rabbits producing these things. Skipping over the Cold War, as honestly it's not important to the narrative. All you need to know is that Soviet tank design in this period consisted of refining and upgrading existing tanks, and Cold War Soviet tank design saw a gradual evolution, and eventually Soviet tank design culminated in a few main battle tanks, namely the T-72 and the T-80. However, before the Soviets could take their tank designs any further, the Soviet Union kinda collapsed. Unlike the Third Reich, which came crashing down in flames, the Soviet Union just sort of fizzled out. The Russian Federation was left with the previously mentioned T-72 and T-80, but couldn't afford to keep producing both, so designs were drawn up to create the successor to replace both, which finally leads us with the T-90 main battle tank. Alright, history lesson over. The specs of the T-90 are as follows. A weight of 46 tons, a frontal armour effective thickness of 69 to 94 centimeters, and the main armament being a 125mm smoothbore cannon, and its secondary armament being a Cord 12.7 heavy machine gun. It's interesting to note that the 120mm cannon is of Soviet origin, yet it's still carried over to this Russian Federation tank. The T-90 shown in the mod is pretty much exactly how it looks in real life. The tank on show is the standard T-90, but with fuel barrels on the back. These were designed to extend operational range. However, these would normally be removed before combat for obvious reasons. The T-90 was a main battle tank and so was designed to fulfill any tasks the Russians needed a tank for, and so it's hard to comment on how the tank's real world use translated in game. As well, in game it acts like an ordinary tank would, albeit with severe Tourette syndrome. I'm not sure whether the mod is at fault here or the tab's physics system makes the tank impossible to work correctly, but the tank shakes like there's no tomorrow and constantly phases through the floor. The only time the damn thing works as intended is when it's not trying to move, and only then was I able to benchmark it. Its main way of attacking is the 125mm cannon on its turret, which is capable of taking out large groups of units. The T-90 in-game doesn't have its secondary heavy machine gun, or any other gun for that matter. Its second way of attacking is ramming, something I doubt real-world tank commanders would order their drivers do. In-game, the ramming works about as well as me in any kind of social situation, which is to say it doesn't. The tank will either disappear into the floor before it reaches its target, or get itself stuck first on the target unit and then the floor, dealing approximately 0 damage. So how does the in-game T-90 compare with the real world one? Well, it looks just like the real one would, and from the looks of things takes an appropriate amount of damage. It costs 300 points, making it far from the most expensive unit, which could represent Russian desire to cheapen its tank production. Probably not, but I thought I'd just throw that in there. My only gripes are the fuel tanks on the back, which like I mentioned earlier would normally be removed before combat, and the lack of its secondary 12.7mm heavy machine gun. But apart from that, all my criticisms are with how buggy it is. So that about does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you do like this kind of content, show me with a like, and also consider subscribing as well. Alright, that's all. Video's over. You can go away now. Bye.